Welcome to Midnight Delight, where nightmares come to play. Tonight, we venture into the unknown, where the line between reality and nightmare fades. Brace yourself for spine-chilling encounters and eerie whispers that will linger long after the story ends. Turn down the lights, settle in, and remember, once you're here, there's no turning back. Let the terror begin. It was Halloween night, and Salem was buzzing with the usual excitement. The streets were filled with costumed kids, the air smelled like burning pumpkins and caramel, and every corner seemed to have some haunted attraction or ghost tour. The town thrived off its dark past, but for me, it was just another night, until everything changed. My friends and I had this dumb idea to hit the old cemetery after the festival. You know, the one where they supposedly buried those witches centuries ago. It was supposed to be a laugh. Just four of us, me, Jake, Kyle, and Sarah. We'd heard all the stories growing up, but no one really took them seriously. Witches, curses, that stuff was for tourists. But we were bored and it seemed like the perfect way to end the night. We made our way through the town, laughing and talking about who had the best costume this year. Jake had brought some cheap bottle of whiskey and we were passing around as we walked. The streets started thinning out as we got closer to the cemetery. Less kids, less noise. The temperature seemed to drop too, but maybe it was just my nerves. The gate to the cemetery was old and rusty, creaking as we pushed it open. I swear, the second we stepped inside, the air got even colder. "Alright, where's the spooky part?" Kyle joked, shining his flashlight around. "Let's find some ghosts." I chuckled, but I couldn't shake this feeling, like we weren't supposed to be there. We wandered deeper, weaving through the rows of crooked headstones, but the whiskey wasn't helping anymore. I felt uneasy, like we were being watched. And then Sarah pointed out this old stone slab. It was bigger than the rest, tucked away in the far corner of the graveyard. There were carvings on it, faded and worn, but you could still make out some of the words. Something about the witches that were executed here, their spirits never finding rest. Classic Salem stuff, right? "What if this is where they buried them?" Sarah asked, running her fingers over the markings. Jake laughed. "Maybe we should say a little prayer or something, huh?" Kyle, always the idiot, dropped to his knees and clasped his hands together. "Oh, mighty witches, forgive us for..." But before he could finish, Sarah did something I'll never forget. She placed both her hands on the stone and whispered something. I didn't catch it, but it sounded like a chant. The wind kicked up almost immediately, howling through the trees and the leaves swirling around us like we were in some kind of vortex. The air felt thick, like it was hard to breathe. "What the hell was that?" Jake asked, backing away. But Sarah didn't answer. She just stared at the stone, her eyes wide. The ground beneath us started to shake, softly at first, then more violently. We stumbled back and the stone began to glow, a faint, eerie light. Then, as if from nowhere, I heard it. Whispers. Faint, like they were just out of reach, but they were there. They were coming from the ground, from the graves, from the air around us. "I think it's time we get out of here," I said, trying to pull Sarah away, but she was frozen in place, her eyes locked on the stone. And then it happened. The earth in front of the slab cracked open, like something was trying to push its way up from beneath. Dark, twisted shadows rose from the ground, taking form. Witches. Not the kind you see in movies with pointy hats and brooms. These were gaunt, their skin stretched tight over their bones, and their eyes glowing with hate. The smell hit us first, like burning flesh mixed with rotting leaves. It was enough to make me gag. One of the witches stepped forward, her long, bony fingers reaching out towards us. Her voice was rasped, like she hadn't spoken in centuries. "Who dares to awaken us?" she hissed. But none of us could speak. We were frozen in place, too terrified to move. The air was thick with dread, and I felt like every shadow was crawling closer, ready to swallow us whole. "They're here," Sarah whispered, snapping out of her trance. "Oh God, they're here." Jake tried to run, but the second he turned, one of the witches raised her hand. He flew back, his body hitting a gravestone with a sickening thud. And he didn't move after that. Kyle screamed, pulling Sarah and me by the arms. "We have to go. Now." But the witches were everywhere. More and more were rising from the ground, their eyes burning with hatred. The air hummed with their dark magic, and I could feel it, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I don't know how we managed it, but we ran, sprinting through the cemetery, ducking between gravestones, trying to stay ahead of the witches. Their voices echoed all around us, laughing, taunting, calling our names. We made it back to the main street, but the town wasn't the same. The streets were empty, the lights flickering. The air smelled like smoke, and in the distance, I could see flames coming from some of the buildings. "They're burning the town," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to stop them." "They're witches," Kyle said. "Like real, actual witches. And they're pissed. What are we supposed to do?" We spotted the old church and ran for it, hoping it might offer some kind of protection. The doors were locked, but Kyle kicked them open, and we stumbled inside. The place was cold, dark, and smelled like mold, but at least it was quiet, for the moment. Sarah was pacing, muttering to herself. "We have to send them back. We have to reverse the chant." "How?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What chant? What did you say back there?" She stopped and looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "It was something I read. Something about awakening the spirits." "You awakened them?" Kyle yelled. "Are you insane?" "I didn't think it would work," she cried. "It's just an old legend. I didn't think." "Well, it did." "Well, it did. And now it looks like they're gonna destroy the whole town." And then we heard the sound of cracking wood echo through the church. The witches had found us. Their shadows slithered through the windows, crawling along the walls. We backed up toward the altar, but there was nowhere to go. "We're dead," Kyle whispered. "We are so dead." But Sarah wasn't giving up. She grabbed a candle from the altar and started chanting again. Her voice was shaking, but she just continued chanting. The witches stopped, their glowing eyes fixed on her. For a moment, everything went still. I could feel the magic in the air, like electricity buzzing against my skin. The lead witch, the one who had spoken first, stepped forward. "You think you can undo what you've done?" she sneered. "Foolish child." Sarah didn't stop chanting. Her voice grew stronger, more confident, as she recited the words over and over. The witches hissed, their forms flickering as if they were struggling to stay in this world. "Keep going," I urged her, stepping between her and the witches. "Don't stop." The witch lunged at us, her hands outstretched, but just before she reached us, she let out an ear-piercing scream. The shadows around her exploded, sending dark wisps into the air, and one by one the witches vanished, sucked back into the ground where they belonged. The air was still, The church was silent. Sarah collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. And Kyle and I just stood there, trying to process what just happened. "We did it," she whispered. "We sent them back." But the town was still burning, and as we stepped outside, the flames had spread. We hadn't saved anyone. Not really. The witches were gone, but the damage was done. Salem would never be the same. And neither would we. It all started with a black envelope. Just showed up one day in my mailbox. No return address, no stamp. My name was written in this fancy, almost old-fashioned script on the front. Lena Carter. I thought it was a prank. I mean, who sends handwritten invites these days? But something about it made me open it. Inside was a card, heavy like expensive paper with this strange silver writing. "You're invited to the party of a century, October 31st, the Morgan Estate, at midnight." The Morgan Estate? That old mansion on the edge of town? Everyone knew it had been abandoned for years. People said it was haunted, but I never believed any of that stuff. Still, curiosity got the best of me, and for some reason, I felt drawn to it. I figured if it was a prank, I'd just leave when no one showed up. So, Halloween night came, and I dressed up. Nothing too crazy, just a black dress and a cheap witch hat. I grabbed the invitation and drove out to the mansion. The place looked exactly like I remembered. Old, crumbling, surrounded by trees that looked like they'd been dead for years. But to my surprise, the driveway was packed with cars. Maybe it wasn't a prank after all. I parked and walked up the long path leading to the front door. Music drifted out from inside, this low, haunting melody that sent a chill up my spine. I hesitated for a second, but then I knocked. The door swung open on its own, revealing a grand entrance hall lit by dozens of flickering candles. The party was in full swing. People were everywhere, dancing, laughing, drinking. Everyone was dressed in these elaborate costumes like something straight out of an old movie. Suits, gowns, masquerade masks. I didn't recognize anyone, but they all acted like I belonged, nodding and smiling as I walked through the crowd. But something was off. At first I couldn't put my finger on it, but then I noticed it. The air was cold. Not just a little chilly, it was freezing, like walking into a freezer. And the people, they looked too perfect, almost like they were from another time. Their clothes weren't just costumes, they seemed real, like they'd been plucked out of history. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just a really elaborate theme, I told myself. But the longer I stayed, the stranger things got. I found myself talking to this woman at the bar. She was dressed in this stunning red gown, her hair pinned up in these perfect vintage curls. Her eyes had this strange glow to them, like she wasn't really there. "So how do you know the host?" I asked, trying to make small talk. She looked at me, her smile fading slightly. "I've always been here," she said softly. "Always?" She just nodded, her eyes drifting away like she was lost in thought. I was about to ask more when I noticed the clock on the wall. It was just past midnight, but the hands weren't moving. They were stuck. I looked around trying to find someone who could explain what was going on, but no one seemed to notice. The guests just kept dancing, drinking, laughing like nothing was wrong. I started to feel uneasy. I needed some air, needed to get out of there for a minute. I made my way around the mansion where I found a door leading outside to a courtyard. As soon as I stepped out, the cold hit me even harder. The air was thick with fog, and the trees surrounding the courtyard swayed in a wind I couldn't feel. I heard something then. A whisper. Faint, barely audible, but it was there. I turned, scanning the foggy courtyard, and that's when I saw her. A girl standing just at the edge of the trees. Her dress was tattered and all dirty, her hair hanging in wet clumps around her face. She looked like she'd been through hell. "Hey!" I called out, taking a step toward her. "Are you okay?" But she didn't move, just stared at me with these wide, hollow eyes. Then she spoke, her voice barely more than a rasp. "You have to leave before it's too late." I froze. "What do you mean?" "The party," she said, her voice starting to shake. "It never ends. We're all trapped here." I felt my stomach drop. "Trapped?" I said. "They won't let you leave," she whispered, stepping closer. "They need someone new, someone alive." I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be real. She had to be messing with me. "I'm not staying," I said, backing towards the door. She shook her head, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and sadness. "It's too late. Once you enter, you are part of it." I turned and ran back into the house, my heart pounding. I needed to find the exit, get to my car, and leave this place. But as soon as I stepped back inside, everything felt wrong. The music was louder, but it wasn't the same cheerful melody from before. It was distorted, echoing through the halls. The people weren't dancing anymore. They were just standing there, staring at me with these cold, empty eyes. I ran toward the front door, but when I reached it, it was locked. I yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. I was trapped. I spun around, and that's when I saw them, the party guests. They weren't people anymore. Their skin was pale, almost translucent. Their eyes hollow, their faces twisted in unnatural smiles. They moved towards me in unison, like they were being controlled by some unseen force. "Please," I begged, backing up against the door. "Let me out! Please let me out!" One of them, a man in a dark suit with a skeletal face, stepped forward. His voice was calm, almost soothing. "You're our guest now, Lena. You've joined the party. And the party never ends." I felt the tears swelling up in my eyes as I shook my head. "No, no, I didn't know." But it didn't matter. The guests kept moving closer, their cold hands reaching out toward me. I bolted down the hallway, running through room after room, but every door I tried was locked. Every window was sealed shut. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps slow and steady, like they knew there was no rush, because they knew I couldn't escape. I ended up in the ballroom again, the grand chandelier above flickering like the candles were about to go out. The clock was still stuck at midnight, and the room was filled with the same ghostly figures, watching me, waiting. I spun around looking for another way out, and that's when I saw it. The mirror on the far wall. I don't know why, but something about it felt important, like it was calling to me. So I ran to it, hoping maybe it was some kind of hidden door or passage. But when I got too close, I saw my reflection. Only, it wasn't my reflection. It was me, but different. My skin was pale. My eyes were hollow. And my mouth was twisted into the same eerie smile the other guests had. I reached out to touch the glass and my reflection moved with me. But there was something in its eyes. Something wrong. Before I could react, the mirror shattered, and the room was filled with the sound of breaking glass. I stumbled back, covering my face, but when I looked again, the guests were gone. The room was empty. The music had stopped, the candles were out, and I was alone. I ran to the door, my heart pounding in my chest, and this time, it opened. I bolted out of the mansion, down the steps into my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition, but I managed to start it and peel out of the driveway. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind racing with what had just happened. I wanted to believe it wasn't real, that it was just some kind of sick joke. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw them. The party guests, standing at the end of the driveway watching me with those hollow eyes. And as I drove away, I heard it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. "You'll be back, Lena. The party's not over." I never went back to Morgan Estate after that night. But sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I can hear the music, the faint sound of laughter echoing in the distance. And I know deep down, I am still a part of the party, whether I want to be or not. It was Halloween night, and the streets were filled with kids in costumes, running from house to house with their bags wide open, ready to collect as much candy as they could. I was out with my friends, Eli, Jake, and Katie. We'd hit every house in the neighborhood, but there was this one house at the very end of the street that no one ever went to. You know the type. It was old, run down, the kind of place that just felt off, even when it wasn't Halloween. "I bet they've got the good candy," Jake smirked, nudging Eli forward. We stood at the edge of the yard, staring up at the house. The windows were dark, lawn overgrown, and an eerie chill seemed to hang in the air. But Jake wouldn't take no for an answer. "Come on, what's the worst that could happen?" he said. We all hesitated, but in the end we followed him. We weren't going to let Jake think we were scared. The four of us crept up the stairs to the front door, the wood creaking under our weight. Jake knocked, and we waited. At first, nothing happened. No lights turned on, no sounds from inside, just silence. Then the door creaked open, just a crack, and a bony hand slipped through holding a single piece of candy for each of us. The hand was pale, almost sickly, and its fingers were too long, like they belonged to something else. We didn't see who or what was on the other side. The hand quickly disappeared and the door shut with a loud thud. Jake looked down at the candy in his hand. It was strange, wrapped in shiny black paper with no label, no logo, no nothing. "Cool," Jake said, pocketing it. "Let's go." We headed back to our usual route, hitting a few more houses before calling it a night. It wasn't until we got back to Eli's place that Jake brought out the weird candy. "Anyone want to try it?" he asked, holding it up. No one said anything. We all just kind of stared at the candy, a little suspicious of it, I guess. "Scared?" Jake teased. And that was all it took. None of us wanted to be the chicken of the group, so we each unwrapped the candy and popped it into our mouths. It tasted weird. Not bad, but not good either. It was sweet, but with this strange, bitter aftertaste that made me wince. "Ugh, gross," Eli said, spitting it out into a napkin. "But Jake?" He swallowed his whole. "You guys are such wimps," he laughed. We shrugged it off and spent the rest of the night hanging out, watching horror movies and eating the normal candy. But after a while, something started to feel off. My head felt heavy, like the room was spinning. I thought it was just a sugar rush at first, but then I noticed Jake staring at the wall, his face pale. "What's up?" I asked, nudging him, but he didn't answer. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. No, not just a shadow. Something in the shadow. It looked like a figure, crouched in the corner, its limbs twisted and long, its face hidden in the darkness. My heart skipped a beat, but I blinked and it was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Jake just nodded, his face still drained of color. Katie and Eli were quiet too, looking around nervously. "Guys, I don't feel so good," Eli said, right before jumping up and running to the bathroom. The door slammed shut and we could hear him throwing up. Katie was about to go check on him when the power cut out. The TV went dark, and the only light in the room was from the jack-o'-lantern flickering on the table. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, standing up. I grabbed my phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but it only made things worse. Shadows danced across the walls, growing taller and more twisted with every flicker of light. I tried to steady my breathing, but it was like the air was thick, suffocating. "I'm getting freaked out," Katie said, her voice starting to shake. "This isn't funny anymore." Just as she said that, we heard Eli screaming from the bathroom. We all rushed to the door, banging on it, but he wouldn't respond. The screaming stopped suddenly, replaced by a soft, wet sound like something was slithering across the floor. "Eli," Jake whispered through the door, but no answer. Jake took a deep breath and opened the door. The bathroom was dark, the air thick with a strange metallic smell. My flashlight flickered, the beam struggling to stay steady. There was something in the mirror. Not Eli, something else. Its face was twisted, its eyes glowing red, and its mouth hung open, lined with sharp teeth. And then I blinked and it was gone. Eli was huddled in the corner, shaking. His eyes were wide with fear. "They're everywhere," he whispered, clutching his stomach. I can't stop seeing them." "What are you talking about?" Jake asked, kneeling beside him. "The monsters. They're everywhere." I wanted to tell him he was just imagining it, that it was all in his head. But I couldn't, because I was seeing them too. Dark figures lurking in the shadows, twisted faces grinning at us from the walls, the ceiling, everywhere. It was like the candy had opened some kind of door and now we couldn't close it. "I'm getting out of here," Katie said, bolting for the door. But as she reached for the handle, she froze. Her body stiffened, her eyes wide with horror. There in the hallway was the thing I'd seen in the corner earlier. It was taller now, its limbs unnaturally long, its face hidden behind a veil of shadows. It reached out for her, its fingers stretching, twisting, until they wrapped around her arm. "Katie!" I screamed, running toward her, but before I could reach her, she was gone. Just like that. Swallowed by the darkness. None of us knew what was going on. The house felt like it was closing in on us, the walls breathing, shifting as the shadows grew thicker. The monsters, whatever they were closing in. I could feel them watching, waiting. But every time we tried to leave, the shadows blocked our way. They moved with us, following our every step, their twisted faces grinning from the darkness. The hallucinations were getting worse, except they didn't feel like hallucinations anymore. They felt real. Too real. We made a run for the back door, stumbling over each other in our panic. But when we reached it, there was something waiting for us. A figure, hunched and rotting, its skin peeling away, revealing the raw flesh beneath. It grinned at us, its teeth sharp and jagged, and it held something in its hand. The same black wrapped candy. And then it spoke.
"You ate the curse. Now you belong to us."
I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding in my chest. My hands were shaking. The world around me was spinning, twisting as the monsters closed in. I tried to fight it, to tell myself it wasn't real. But deep down I knew. The candy wasn't just cursed, it was alive. And now, so were the monsters. Jake was the first to go. The shadows wrapped around him, dragging him into the darkness. His screams echoing in the night. Eli followed soon after, his body crumpling to the floor as the monsters closed in, their twisted faces grinning down at him. I was the last one standing, but I knew it wouldn't last. The monsters were everywhere, on the walls, in the mirrors, in the very air around me. There was no escape. The candy had trapped us in its nightmare, and there was no way out. As the shadows wrapped around me, pulling me into their cold, suffocating embrace, I realized something. Halloween wasn't about the costumes or the candy or the fun. It was about the monsters. And they're real. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a scare. Remember, here at Midnight Delight, the stories may end, but the nightmares live on. Sleep tight, if you can.